There are about 400 billion galaxies in the universe, which is about 14 billion years old. There are about 400 billion cells in a human brain, a few years old. The average galaxy has about 400 billion stars. The average human cell has about 400 billion atoms. A human cell is about 1/100th the size of a 1 millimeter wide grain of sand. How can we visualize, appreciate, and understand such big and such small numbers that we encounter each day? Theme parks are facilities that provide a visual representation of such big and such small numbers. Theme parks can be set up anywhere where there is a 100-meter long path. 1 millimeter is the width of a fine grain of sand. If the grain of sand would be 100 meters wide, the strand of hair would be 10 meters wide. A cell would be 1 meter wide. Bacteria would be 10 centimeters wide. Virus would be 1 centimeter wide. DNA would be 1 millimeter wide. The time walk in the theme park takes you through time from the Big Bang of the birth of our universe to its whimpering future. 1 meter corresponds to about 300 years. The start point in the theme park marks the beginning. About 14 billion years ago, there was a quantum fluctuation like an unexpected hiccup. The universe was born in a big bang. The universe exploded and stretched, and many small bangs quantized space with particles and antiparticles, and they jostled until they annihilated one another, like soldiers in battle. But the birth of the universe was not perfect, for there was a tiny fraction more particles than antiparticles, and an ash of particles remained behind to coalesce and take form that coalesced into mass. Mass gravitated into clumps of different sizes, and the clumps spun around and got hot and ignited into stars. Stars burnt like an oven and spewed forth atoms of all sizes like pastry. Atoms spewed from burnt-out stars gravitated and aggregated and reincarnated into new stars. 14,000 kilometers from the theme park, 4.5 billion years ago, our sun was born. A tiny fraction of the atoms were left behind and formed rings around the sun like a fence, and with time they bumped, stuck, and rolled up to form planets. A planet called Earth remained near a star called Sun, following it like a child follows her mother. The heat from the sun shone on her and evaporated water which rose up in the air, moved, and fell as rain. The rain baptized her, bathed her, and made lakes, rivers, and oceans to cool her. Gases raised up and covered her with a warm blanket of air. When the crust of the earth cracked, liquid rock below oozed to the surface above the waters, solidified, and formed land. Weather carved the land and slowly eroded the rocks, forming sand. 10,000 kilometers from the theme park, about 4 billion years ago, a soup of atoms brewed, cooking basic building blocks of life that grouped and prospered and evolved. The molecules of life grouped and formed cells. With time, cells were able to sense their environment and move where they needed to. So they swam around looking for the sustenance of energy and fled from the discomforts of danger. They grew in size to increase their awareness of their environment until they were too big to contain in one mass. The cells then made communication networks with each other, and in this way, groups of cells formed multicellular organisms. The cells, having support of other cells, evolved specialized functions. A few gradually wiggled out of the seas and discovered land. 1,500 kilometers from the start point in the theme park, about 500 million years ago, Plants finally landed on land. They were soon followed by amphibians. At the 1,000-kilometer point, 150 million years later, insects began to crawl about and fly around. 850 kilometers from the start point, 50 million years later, turtles, crocodiles, dinosaurs, and flowers made their appearance. At the 500-kilometer point, about 150 million years ago, a huge comet hit the Earth and killed off the dinosaurs. This catastrophic event allowed mammals to start their evolution towards world domination. The birds eventually replaced the dinosaurs, and at the 350-kilometer point, 50 million years later, the bees joined the birds. 600 meters from the think park, about 200,000 years ago, one unique life form called man evolved. Men developed to a point where they were able to exploit their environment and move to wherever they wanted to. The more they moved, the more curious they got, until they moved to every continent there was to move to. They had freedom to want, to desire, to wish, to hope, and to believe, and they eventually evolved to exploit their environment. Between the 55-meter mark, about 16,000 years ago, and the 25-meter mark, about 8,000 years ago, the oceans rose 70 meters in three great waves of floods 4,000 years apart. Man's technological ascent began at the 30-meter point about 10,000 years ago, at the start of the Neolithic or New Stone Age period, with the invention of polished and sharpened stone axes. These tools allowed forests to be cleared for large-scale farming. Cloth appeared soon after. At the 23 meters mark, about 7,000 years ago, man discovered copper, and 2,000 years later, at the 15-meter mark, man invented the wheel to carry his heavy stones great distances, and discovered bronze, a copper-tin alloy, which made his tools sharp and hard enough to cut stone, and to make his wheels last. At the 20-meter point, 6,000 years ago, man started to write. Written words enabled his thoughts and his knowledge to be stored for later contemplation and to be scattered like seed to grow. This cultivation, communication, and sharing of thoughts, knowledge, and experience resulted in the growth of agriculture that enabled civilizations to flourish. It took him another 3,000 years at the 10-meter mark to discover iron.